Welcome to Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy, where we seek to educate, motivate, and inspire professionals into starting their own healthcare businesses. Now, please welcome your host, entrepreneur, healthcare practitioner, Jason Duprat.
Everybody, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy podcast. Today, we have Dr. Camille Hammond. She's a medical doctor. She has a master's in public health. She completed her residency and fellowship at Johns Hopkins and the National Cancer Institute, respectively. Dr. Hammond sits on the University of Richmond Alumni Association Board of Directors and also the Board of Trustees for the University of Maryland School of Medicine. She is the owner of the publishing house Good Books About Tough Topics and is also an author. Along with her husband, Dr. Jason Hammond, she co-founded the Cade Foundation in 2005, where she provides support to families with infertility. So the Cade Foundation is a nonprofit that supports families overcoming infertility by providing information, support, and grants for adoption and fertility treatments. To date, the foundation has supported 111 families and has awarded over $800,000 in support for adoption and treatment. That's amazing. Welcome, Dr. Camille, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. And I have to apologize. I have now rotated off of those boards, so I'm no longer serving at the University of Richmond or at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. But I appreciate that and welcome the opportunity to chat a little bit about the nonprofit route, as well as for those who may be interested in writing, what I did to write my book and also start our publishing house. My husband and I have a publishing house.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Like I told you in the pre-chat, one of my interests is down the road starting a nonprofit and with the goal of teaching teens and youth how to manage personal finances and start in entrepreneurship. So super excited to get into a little bit of that. Authorship maybe in the future for me as well. So yeah, we have a lot of cool things to talk about.
Great. Awesome.
So I'd like to start off a little bit by sort of you painting your picture of where you grew up, what life was like for you as a 10-year-old Camille, and sort of how you transitioned into where you're at today.
I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and I always knew that I wanted to be a physician. I thought when I was younger that I wanted to be an anesthesiologist, and really pursued that up until my third year, going into my fourth year of medical school, at which point I realized that I was having a hard time getting pregnant. And so even when I graduated from medical school, I had not committed. I did not go into the match process because I decided I wanted to take a year off after medical school to give my body some stress-free time, and I was hoping that I would conceive during that year. And when that did not happen, after a couple of months, I took a job in public health just to keep my little toe in the medical door before going back into my residency program. And I had actually been offered a contract to do anesthesia and just had not signed that. And after a few months working in public health, realized that I really loved that work and I wanted to learn more and kind of grow in that direction as opposed to the clinical direction. And so I turned down the residency position in anesthesia and enrolled in the general preventive medicine program, or applied to the general preventive medicine program at Hopkins and was accepted. And so then I started my public health residency there. And I also completed my master's in public health at the Bloomberg School, that just working on a population level and addressing major problems through education and more grassroots population-based intervention really appealed to me. Infertility was something that I was continuing to deal with at that point. And so I focused my research on fertility preservation. And so when I matriculated to the National Cancer Institute for my fellowship, and my focus was fertility preservation and cancer survivors. So I continued to stay engaged in that fertility related work because it was something that was very personal to me at that point, and as it is right now. And so when I finished my fellowship, I went back to University of Maryland and started working in their cancer survivorship program, and headed up a program in cancer survivorship for people with health disparities, and loved the work. But let's see, during my last year of residency, my husband and I got pregnant. Not really. We had infertility, and after 5 years of us trying on our own and actually having many cycles of fertility treatment, we were counseled to consider adoption or gestational carrier because we had done all this treatment and I never got pregnant. And my mom and dad asked if my mom could carry a baby for us. And we politely declined because my mom was postmenopausal, and my parents were empty nesters. And so we didn't want to burden them with that. And also we didn't even know if it was possible. But my parents were very persistent, and, you know, we talked a lot, prayed a lot, and ended up moving forward. And so she got pregnant. We did move forward, and she got pregnant with our triplets, and delivered those babies at the end of my residency. So I became a mom, and, you know, this lifelong dream of being able to be a mom was realized. So kind of fast forwarding a couple of years, I was working at the School of Medicine and loved what I did, but didn't see my kids. I was up in the morning and out before they really woke up, and I was tucking them in when they were pretty much asleep at night. And I had other people that were filling in the gap. But after everything we went through, you know, I wanted to be an involved and engaged parent, and my husband did as well, although he's an orthopedic surgeon. And so, you know, it was going to be hard for both of us to be out of the house. And as a family, we just made the decision for me to leave that clinical setting and be able to pursue my other lifelong dream of starting a nonprofit or working a nonprofit. At a nonprofit, we had actually started the Cade Foundation, named after my mom, about a year after the kids were born. But the goal of that was just to raise $10,000 and be able to give that entire lump sum to one family, because we figured if we were able to do that, then that would be our way of paying it forward. Because we had so many people who were praying with and for us, who supported us financially, because fertility treatment is very expensive. And we had insurance for part of it, but we still had to come out of pocket for a lot of money. And so we, you know, family members who had lent us money, and, you know, we also had access to information support, which is not something that you can take for granted. So many people just don't even know that it's possible to build your family even if you have that infertility. So we had started that a couple of years prior, and we're doing a little bit of small fundraising. But again, the goal was just to support one family. Well, when I left my work at the hospital, so that I could be more present with our family and our children, you know, I had all this free time. And so I started running Cade full time. Instead of it being more of a hobby, it became my job. I'd like to say that's when things really started to pick up, but there was still a lot of work that had to take place, a lot of relationships that needed to be built, and just a lot of, I think sometimes, at least dealing with major funders, they want to see that you're going to still be there after a couple of years and not have kind of gone under like so many organizations did. But that's when, you know, I started to work full time at Cade, and I'm still running the Cade Foundation, although we do have a staff of about 5 people, and we have interns, and we have tremendous support from the TTC, or Trying to Conceive, community throughout the country. So that's my story.
Okay, awesome. And just to clarify, for anybody who wants to ask questions or leave comments, feel free, and then we'll answer your questions and comments too. You're welcome to do that. And just to be clear, on your name link that we have here, it says Tinina Q, but that's just because you're on your business profile page.
Correct.
Facebook automatically loads up the name of the page that's associated with the login. So you're actually Dr. Camille Hammond. You started the Tinina Q Cade Foundation, just to clarify for everybody who's watching. Awesome. So what's the process like of actually getting a nonprofit started from the ground up? Did a great job of explaining your story and sort of your motivation and how you were touched by infertility yourself. What was the process like? I imagine it's not super easy. There's probably lots of paperwork and things like that, but what does that look like? And then what's the difference between a nonprofit and a not-for-profit?
Well, that one's easy. Nonprofits and not-for-profits are the same thing. And it doesn't mean that you don't make money. It just means that you don't give yourself whatever's left over at the end of the year. It gets automatically reinvested into the organization. So technically no one owns the Cade Foundation. It's a public charity, as opposed to you just having an organization that you may or may not make a lot of money from. There are people that have charitable organizations that are not designated as nonprofit. I think that the main reason you would want to go through the administrative process of registering as a nonprofit, because it is pretty rigorous and it takes a lot of time and patience compared to just setting up an LLC to do great things, is if you want to apply for grants or you want to get funding from other organizations, you're going to need to establish a nonprofit. But if you're able to independently do whatever it is you want to do, you may not even need to set up a nonprofit. So when my husband and I give him credit, he is the co-founder, Dr. Jason Hammond. When we started the Cade Foundation, again, we had young babies. We were $100,000 in debt. And that was all related to the fertility treatment that we had in order to have these beautiful babies. So we just didn't have any extra money to pay a lawyer to file paperwork on our behalf. I know a lot of people end up just paying other people to do it, and it's much quicker, and the process is seamless. Because we didn't have it, I basically filled out all the paperwork myself, but I found that the people at the IRS and also the state credentialing agencies that I worked with, we filed in the state of Maryland because we were living in the state of Maryland. They were very helpful. And so I made lots of mistakes. I would check box A when I should have checked box B. And so I did a lot of communicating back and forth with the people, who were within those organizations that I was registering with. So I think the process took about 6 to 9 months. And if you go through a lawyer, it may be as short as 3 months. But it was what we were able to do. And, it did take time, but I think I learned a lot in the process and have continued to be very involved in credentialing. And I would say as a business owner or as the founder of a nonprofit organization, you need to know about every single thing that goes on with your organization. If you completely depend on a lawyer, an accountant, some other person to do everything, you don't know when they're messing up. You don't know when they have forgotten to do something or they've done it wrong. And so then it's going to be longer before you kind of catch up, and you may end up having penalties, or you may end up losing the ability to operate in certain areas. So even though that process was rigorous and it took longer, it really did teach me a valuable lesson about at least knowing about what should happen, for the organization, and not being afraid to interact with IRS agents or people at the state level. And once we decided that we were going to start to do business in states or do some fundraising in states outside of Maryland, we had to register with those states. So at this point, The Cade Foundation has done work in Maryland, DC, Virginia, New York, California, Florida, Texas, Indiana. So in all the states that we've done fundraising, we've had to register. We've had to apply to be exempt so that we didn't end up paying taxes. Oh, Georgia as well. So that we didn't end up paying taxes on the items that we needed for our fundraisers. Some states you have to register and you can't get exemption unless you fit into a very narrow group, which, we didn't always qualify for exempt status, but you always have to register and be licensed within that state as a foreign nonprofit, i.e. you were not founded in that state. Okay. And you usually have to have someone from the state who would serve as your point of contact. So, we don't operate in states where we don't have some community or some base. And so, in those states outside of Maryland, I usually identify one of the persons who's part of the Cade Foundation community as our point of contact or our agent, our resident agent, so that if there are any matters that need to be addressed immediately, there's at least someone who is in that area that can address it. And I've done that instead of hiring an agent. You can hire someone who would serve in that role, but as a nonprofit that is still very grassroots, we've just opted to not spend money on things that we didn't need to spend money on, so that it would be available for grants and for more support of the families that.
Great advice. And one of the things you mentioned was that you really should know the basics of the legal and the accounting and form filing and reporting, because yes, professionals can drop the ball. I've experienced that before. CPAs drop the ball. They forget to file a report, or they think you're filing it and don't tell you that you have to file it. So you should really look into these things yourself and have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, whether you're running a nonprofit or a for-profit business. It's a really good idea to educate yourself.
And I would even add, you need to be able to look at their work and understand what they've done, because just because they turned in a paper doesn't mean it was correct. I'm not saying that you need to wordsmith them or kind of micromanage them, but if they mess up, you're still responsible, because it's your organization and you have to sign off saying, I agree that what they said was right. And so just, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to go back. And if a provider is not serving you well, or you have to ask questions, the same type of questions over and over again, don't be afraid to switch providers.
Yeah, great advice. Yep. And if you're sitting at the top of an organization, if you're the founder, the president, you are ultimately responsible. It doesn't matter if somebody else made a mistake. The IRS will come after you and you alone. Absolutely. So, yep. So great advice right there. When it comes to starting up initially, so it's my understanding that you can't really raise funds to start up if you don't have all the paperwork and stuff filed. So how do you fund that? Is that funded out of your own personal money?
Yes, we funded that out of our own personal money, but it wasn't that expensive. And I don't remember what the fees were, but I'm sure that they were less than $100. It was just the time.
Yeah.
That was involved. Again, if I had an extra $1,000 or $2,500 at that point, I probably could have just paid an attorney and not have to think about it. But because we were already $100,000 in debt, we just didn't have that money. We needed it. We needed every dollar that we had, especially when I left my job that I was, making a very good salary at. My husband was finishing up fellowship because he finished a couple years after me. So we went from making, a good amount of money as a family to being $100,000 in debt and reducing our annual revenue by 2/3 by me, coming home and just running the foundation full time with no salary, and just having my husband's salary. Now, don't feel bad for me. I mean, he was an orthopedic surgery resident. So as soon as he left, he was a fellow. As soon as he finished fellowship, he started making, more than enough to cover our household expenses. And we were fine, but we just didn't have a lot of kind of there was not a lot of fat there. There was
exactly
all bone and muscle, lean muscle. So, you know, we went through the process. It was a little scary, a little intimidating, because I had never even done my own taxes. I mean, you know, my parents kind of handled all that as I was coming up. And so for me to have to go from never having to think about any of that stuff to filing paperwork on my own, and then getting responses saying, oh, you checked this box wrong, you should have done that. It was a little intimidating at first, but like anything, the more you do it, you get used to it and you get good at it. You get much better at it, you know, and so you start calling before you send the paperwork in to say, hey, I've got a question, you know, should I do box A instead of box B? And again, they were very kind and very generous and very willing to help me understand those processes.
Great advice. That took a lot of courage for you to leave your well-paying job to do something like this. So definitely applaud you. Is there any advice you'd give to anybody who's considering doing the same sort of thing, making that leap from leaving a full-time job to starting a nonprofit?
I love what I do. I go to sleep sometimes thinking about the work, and I wake up thinking about the work. The work gives me energy.
I love it. Yeah.
When I was in the clinical setting, I didn't always feel like that. I often felt tired and burned out at the end of the day. That's not to say that I don't get tired and that sometimes I don't feel overwhelmed, but my sense of, you know, the fatigue is different. I felt mentally fatigued before. Now, even when I'm tired, I'm still excited about what I get to do. The privilege of being able to work in this area, I still count it a privilege. So, you know, I say, if you have the ability to financially cover yourself, and certainly don't step out if you are going to end up on the street, you know, and homeless, but if you have the ability to meet your basic needs, not your wants, not your, you know, I can have anything. I mean, you know, if you're willing to make those sacrifices, it will pay off. It will pay off.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So when it comes to the fundraising portion of it, because you obviously have to do a lot of fundraising.
I do.
How do you get started in that? How do you make the connections? I saw online that it looked like you put on some sort of a gala or like a fundraiser type thing. I saw some pictures that I came across. So how does that even evolve? How does that get started? So before you ask people for money, you have to build relationships, because no one gives to strangers. And you also need to develop some friends in the industry. So before you start to fundraise, you need to fundraise. Let people know who you are. Let them know why you're doing this. You know, introduce them to your story. Introduce them to the organization without any expectation that they do anything for you. Develop some relationships. So, and that took years. And when I started, I thought that just because we had our nonprofit status, the checks were going to start flying in. You know, I just had this vision of, oh my goodness, when we get started, we're going to have to get this big office and hiring and, you know, all of these things. And the reality was so much different than that. I worked out of my house. I took over the living room, and, you know, I worked out of the living room for 2 or 3 years without any money. I don't think I got paid until Cade Foundation was like 5 or 6 years old. And I mean, nothing. And so even though by that point the organization was sustaining itself, you know, it still wasn't sustaining itself to the point where I could take a salary. So I definitely encourage you to pursue your passion if this is something that you really want to do, but don't go into it assuming that just because you quit your well-paying physician job that people are going to recognize that you're a physician and automatically give you money. You're starting back over from scratch. So you're less than an intern in the nonprofit world. Your background is great,
But if people don't know you, they don't care about your background. There are a lot of physicians out here. So you're going to have to make some friends. You're going to have to show up at other people's events. You're going to have to support other organizations that are in the field that you're working, because that's how things are done. You know, you support me, I support you. You come out to my activity, I come out to your activity. But by doing that, you're going to also meet a lot of great people. And some of those people are going to, over time, become supporters. I've never had any major gift come in that did not, that was not in connection in some way to someone who I had a strong relationship with. Now, I'm not saying that my friends give me money, but from an organizational standpoint, if they don't know you, they're not going to give you anything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes really good sense. And a couple of key takeaways there. Fundraise before you fund raise. I love that. Yeah, great little tagline there. And then do what sets you on fire. Like, seek your passions was some other great advice before getting started, because you might be in for a run of not making much to any money at the outset. So that's great advice there.
Yes. I would also say start it before you quit your real job, because if you find that this part-time thing, you know, doesn't really add much value to your life, that you don't really want to do it enough to inconvenience yourself, then why would you think that if you quit your real job, you would change your perception? I found that I was doing so much of my quote unquote hobby toward the end that my real job became almost a distraction, almost a nuisance.
Yeah.
And that's why, even though, you know, financially it was not in our best interest for me to leave my well-paying doctor job, you know, from my passion standpoint, and also from where we wanted to be as a family and the values that we wanted to make sure our kids had, and, you know, wanted to make sure that we were pouring into them instead of having a nanny or, you know, someone else that was kind of putting their values on our children. It was easy, honestly, to make that decision. You know, money is not a motivating factor for me. I really am not driven by money at all. So, but for some people, money is like the biggest thing. They think about it all the time. And you need to be clear. You may have years where you can't cut yourself a paycheck. And more than that, you are cutting paychecks so that your organization can continue to operate, because you still got to pay those state fees every single year. If there are programs that your organization has said it was going to do, you still have to do those things. You can't just say, I'm going to do it. You got to do it. And if you haven't been able to raise any money from other sources, then the checks have to come from your pocket. So absolutely pursue your passion, but start it when you still have a full-time gig, because then you can decide, okay, I like it, but I don't like it enough to leave my real job and that security that comes with that. Or this is so wonderful and I'm going to do this no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's more fantastic advice. When it comes to getting connected with fundraisers, what are things that like donors look for before they get excited to sort of fund your organization? Are they looking at financial documents? Are they more interested in testimonials and case studies of the work that you're doing? What plays into getting donors to get excited about donating?
First and foremost, what we just talked about, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to know you. And they've got to believe that you are who you say you are, and that your organization is what you have said it was. So you've got to start the work even before you have support. If you say, like you said, you wanted to do work with kids and talking with them about finances, there's nothing stopping you from doing that right now. But, you know, even if you say, I'm going to do it twice a year, I'm going to have a little conference for kids, or I'm going to go into schools twice a year and do this, because what you will start to do is build up a reputation in your community for being one that's willing to give back and support the community in that way. You don't know who's watching you while you're not paying attention, but somebody is observing you. So remember, do the work that you said you were going to do. Different organizations and donors want different things. I think people invest in people. They invest, they give their hard-earned money because they believe in you, and they believe so much in what you are doing that they take it on as something that is there. So it becomes not just your dream, it becomes their dream as well. Organizations want to see that your financials are in good shape. So large donations, I would say over $5,000, didn't really start to come in from organizations until we were probably at about year 3 or 4, maybe even year 5, because they wanted to see that we had a track record of keeping our financials in good shape. We were actually tracking the expenses and doing, regular. We were doing good bookkeeping. The money wasn't being commingled with my personal money, which is a trap many small business owners and nonprofit founders fall into. They say, well, I'm spending all the money anyway. Why not just have one account? Don't do that, because that's called commingling, and that's a turnoff for donors. That's a good way to ensure that no one wants to trust you with their money. Get another account, and if you have to write a check every month to this nonprofit, A, it's going to be easier to track, but B, it shows that you are serious and you're treating it like it's a standalone business and organization. So keep your books in order, do your filings regularly, just try and stay ahead of things. When I first got started, I didn't mark things on the calendar. And so, there were times where dates would come and go where I should have sent in paperwork, but I forgot about it. Just put it on the calendar. May 15th is a big day. You've got to have your nonprofit taxes are due today to the federal government, but your state of Virginia and your state of California and your state of Maryland nonprofit registration paperwork is also due. So, that means you have to communicate with your accountant and say, hey, you can't send me my paperwork when it's due. You got to send it to me ahead of time so that I have time to get it out to those other agencies that need to get it. Otherwise, I'm going to end up paying late fees. But this is all kind of getting into the weeds, and it may be getting into too much, but you just got to keep good records. Don't put the stuff on your calendar when things are due. The work inspires me and it gives me energy, but I can't do the good work without taking care of the paperwork.
Yeah, so, that makes sense.
Yeah, make sure that you stay on top of all of those things.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. It's very good pointers. What about sort of building a team out to help you? Are you looking you get volunteers? Are you having to start payroll? How does that look like? Because obviously you really need to build out a team if you're going to be doing something like this. It's really hard to do just by yourself. How do you accomplish that?
And many donors, large donors especially, will not fund you if it's just you. And that was something that was hard for me to understand, because I thought, well, I'm doing a good job. I've got other great people who are volunteers that are helping, but their perspective that I got was, you need staff, because if you go down, the whole organization is going to fall, and we don't want to invest in an organization that can fall if you get a cold. So I had to hire good people, and I had to learn how to manage people. Working in a medical environment, you may say, well, I've had residents work under me. I may have been a chief resident. I've been an attending. And so I know how to manage people. That's not managing people in an office setting. It's not managing people. It's like new knowledge. You just have to get experience, and you may be able to go to conferences and learn about it. But some of this stuff, you're just going to have to live and experience. And I made tons of mistakes. But I'm really grateful that at this point I have people who really care about the organization. They are committed to our mission. And I've got long-term folks who, have been with Cade Foundation for many years. And we also have fantastic volunteers. We put out the call for volunteers for every one of our events. We always need volunteer support, and they fill in so many really important gaps. And we have many long-term volunteers who have come out every year to certain events. And so I'm really grateful for that. But you can't just depend on volunteers. You need paid staff, because their commitment level is going to be at a much higher level than volunteers. Volunteers will help you when they can, but if something comes up, my car's not working, or I don't feel good today, or whatever, they're not going to show up, but your staff will be there. So get volunteers, certainly, but also you're going to have to pay some people. And don't just rely on friends and family, because friends and family will help you initially. They'll support you financially initially, but then they'll get tired of hearing from you. They'll feel like, I gave you $50 last year. Leave me alone. So you need to build community outside of your small circle of friends and family, but use that year or so where friends and family are fired up and they're excited to do that, because they're gonna be there at least initially. So as you are building, ask them to be a part of building. Ask them to share about your work on social media and to be involved with spreading awareness about what you're doing to other people in their circles, because then those people may be more excited and committed long term compared to your immediate friends and family.
Yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. Are there any books or resources or online courses or programs that you would recommend specific to starting a nonprofit that might help people along the way?
I wish I had taken some. Most of my knowledge is just kind of
School of Hard Knocks.
School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
Tons of mistakes, getting disappointed when the people who I thought would be there forever decided at year 2, we're taking a break. We're going to support some other organizations. But what ended up, and of course, my immediate family never went away. They were always there to support. But many of my friends, kind of took breaks. They checked in and they checked out. But once things started to pick up and we started to get media coverage and we started to do the work that we said we were going to do, and we had all these external people celebrating what we were doing, then many of those people that were there at the beginning came back. So sometimes you got to go outside of your home in order to be recognized at home, but that's okay.
Yeah, great advice. Is there, when I lost my train of thought, but I was going to ask you, when it comes to book publishing, we'll kind of change gears a little bit because I see we're getting close to the end of the time. And when it comes to book publishing, is there anything in starting a publishing house? How did that sort of play out? And any tips for anybody there?
Yes.
Yeah, because you have.
So I wanted to, as an outgrowth of what I do in the nonprofit setting, the Cade Foundation does a lot of education. We do a lot of conferences, mini conferences, in-person conferences, virtual, conferences. We do a lot to share about different supports available for people who struggle with infertility. And I found that it was hard, talking one-on-one or one-on-5. There were times where we had this great panel of speakers and we may have had 5 or 10 people in the audience. And you think this was such good information. And there were so few people who were able to listen to it or to hear it. So I decided I wanted to write a book because the books could be shared with anyone at any time throughout the world. And it wouldn't be limited to Thursday at 7:30 between 8 and 9 o'clock, when we have this room available. I wanted to write a book that was not intimidating. Infertility is really hard to talk about, especially in communities that really don't have any background in that. In many communities, saying you have infertility is almost like saying you're cursed. I mean, they really they don't understand what it is. And so I wanted to write a book that would be non-threatening, but that would really meet people where they are in their area of need. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do an illustrated book, a picture book. And I'm going to include, really detailed pictures of anatomy and talk through real life, what these situations can look like in real life. It's a book of fiction, but it does include a lot of really good detailed information about family building and the challenges that people may encounter. And so I wrote this book that I thought was fantastic. I got great reviews from all of my friends. Again, I asked the people who I knew to read it, and then couldn't get it published anywhere. Nobody wanted to touch it. And so I decided, that's fine, I'll do my own thing. And so I started the Good Books Good Books About Tough Topics publishing house. And they're all going to be illustrated. Right now we have 3 books that have been prepared by 2 authors, myself being one of them. And these are books that are going to be written by physicians for regular non-physician people, but they're going to be about topics that are hard to deal with and that people sometimes struggle to understand. And I've gotten rave reviews about the books, and they have been received very well within the medical community by professionals. So I'm really excited. So one thing I would just suggest is if you have a passion and you really want to write something, it's great if it gets picked up by a large publishing house, but don't be afraid to put in the time and the effort and to start it on your own, because you can still have a very successful book that you independently publish. And the publishing house was just started as a tool so that others who wanted to do the same thing could also have that option.
I love it. I love how you don't let anything stand in your way. If a publisher doesn't want to pick it up, I'm going to start my own publishing company and do it myself.
Why not?
So, fantastic. Yeah, that's great. How can anybody who's interested in picking up one of those books find those? I know that you have a website.
It's good.
They're on Amazon as well, right? The Good Book, and it's spelled G-U-U-D, right?
Correct.
If they were to search for this, yeah.
Yeah, so you can find us on Amazon. There's a website, goodbooks.com, GUUDbooks.com. And for anybody who's interested, in the Urban Dictionary, GUUD means really, really, really good. And so we wanted to talk about things that were, again, hard to talk about, but provide really, really, really good explanations and also support. And so the first couple of books have dealt with infertility, kind of the medical issues, but also the family challenges and the kind of the spiritual issues that may arise. And there's also one about stem cells for orthopedic procedure. So we hope to add some mental health literature to that library, and also some additional books that deal with male reproductive health. Awesome.
That's fantastic. I love it. We're kind of approaching the end of the time, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're super busy.
Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Do you mind sharing a story that your organization has of a family that your organization that really stands out, that your organization has been able to help that family with, some success story, or something that really sort of touched you or really stands out?
So I'll share a story about a family that we funded and that didn't get pregnant. So we funded this fantastic family. I remember seeing them at one of our races, and they just, I remember because we give out $10,000 raffles at our races. So this year, for anybody who's interested, Race for the Family is going to be on June the 8th at the Maryland Zoo. And we will be raffling off $5,000, more or less, in medical, like pharmacy treatment for one cycle of fertility, IVF. And that comes from EMD Serono, who is the manufacturer. And we're also going to be raffling off $10,000 in treatment at Shady Grove Fertility and they are the presenting sponsor for the Race for the Family. So I remember watching a family, it was maybe the 2013 Race for the Family. And, just the way they held each other while we were drawing the number, and just, I just remember wishing in my heart that family would win, because they just looked so connected with one another. And then when someone else's name was drawn, and they just embraced each other and they were crying, and it broke my heart looking at them. And so that next year, when they ended up applying for and receiving a grant, and I realized this was the same family that I had just been kind of secretly looking at, I was really, really happy. So they're lovely, just incredible people. And they had fertility treatment funded by us, and it didn't work. But because Cade is committed to supporting the family, not just through fertility treatment, but we want to be engaged forever. We want to know about the anniversary. We want to, once you bring that baby home, we want an invitation to that 5th birthday. We want to be part of the family. So we stayed engaged with that family. And many years later, they ended up adopting a baby. And this adoption was celebrated, and just, I just think the whole community celebrated when they finally brought this wanted for and prayed for child home. And we've continued to be engaged with that family. There's not a week that goes by that I don't hear an update, or that I don't see them doing something really to give back to the infertility community. And so, their story just touches me every time I think about it. And they had their happy ending. It wasn't the ending that they had hoped for or prayed for, but I think I cannot imagine them with any other child, because the child that they brought home was the baby that they were supposed to have. And he is every bit his mama's son and his daddy's son. So, the beautiful family, and their testimony, I think, can help a lot of people.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing the story. Yeah, I really love what you're doing. I love the mission. I love how you're changing lives and impacting families. It's phenomenal. How can anybody who's interested in learning more about the foundation find out more, look into events and things like that you're doing?
All of our information is online, including our grant applications. And again, the grants provide up to $10,000 for fertility treatment or adoption. And we have 2 cycles of review per year, the next of which starts July 1st. So from the grants to our events, you can visit us online at cadefoundation.org, CADE foundation.org. And you can learn about what we're doing, or you could just give us a call at 410-998-1000. And we function, around the country. So we have events going on in multiple states, and would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for sharing your story. Again, that's cadefoundation.org if anybody's interested in learning more. Dr. Hammond is doing some amazing things. So any support would be much appreciated, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So thanks again for taking the time to put this together with me. And, I know you're busy, so I'm going to sign off here. But I wish you the best of luck in everything that you're doing in the future. You're doing amazing things, and keep up the awesome work.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day. And thank you for your resource that you're providing to encourage people to, step outside the lines and also explore what can be, not just what is, but what's possible.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, I'm going to sign off here, and then
this is Patrick with the Healthcare Entrepreneur Academy. We just want to thank you guys for watching today. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification button, so every Tuesday and Thursday you'll get a notification letting you know that we have a brand new episode on the channel. Also, make sure you guys drop a like and leave us a quick comment letting us know what you thought was the most interesting or applicable piece of advice you got from today's episode. Thanks again for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.